Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Itaya Cha Jagat Nidaya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Haribol. So, in speaking on the subject of Paramatma meditation, I would just like to clarify for those of you who may not be so familiar, what is meditation? Meditation, a lot of people think, unfortunately, that the clearing of the mind, or for the mind to exist in a state of not thinking about anything, constitutes meditation. But the reality is, in the Ashtanga Yoga process, this activity of clearing away agitation from the senses, sensory perception, and the focusing of the mind in a single point, in a very focused manner, this was known as pratyahara and dharana. And this preceded actual meditation or dhyana. If we look at the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, there are a couple of verses which I will read, or a few verses here which I'll read for you, which may help to clarify what meditation really is. So from the first pada, the 41st verse, it states, when the mental modifications and fluctuations of the mind have greatly diminished, the mind becomes like a transparent crystal, and thus can easily take on the qualities of the object of one's meditation, whether it be the perceiver, the object perceived, or the instrument of perception. This identification is called samapati, or being engrossed. In the second pada, on the 25th shloka, it states, when ignorance is destroyed, the identification of the self, or the atma, with matter, which is prakriti, it ceases, and this is liberation. Ignorance is destroyed by the constant discrimination between the self, or the purusha, and the material world. What we are seeing here is that for those who are following the Sankhya yoga system, or the Ashtanga yoga process as laid out by Patanjali, there is a very strong attempt for a person to completely abide within themselves, meaning their own spiritual nature, to become intensely aware of and absorbed in your own spiritual nature. Dhyana, or meditation, is the unbroken flow of thought towards the object of concentration. When only the object of meditation shines forth in the mind, undistorted by the mind of the perceiver, that state is called samadhi, or the highest stage of contemplation. And then finally I will read from the third pada, the 35th verse. The mind, which is subject to change, and the perceiver, which is not, are in proximity, but are of distinct and different characters. When the mind is directed externally and acts mechanically towards objects, there is either pleasure or pain. When at the appropriate time, however, an individual begins inquiry into the very nature of the link between the perceiver and perception, the mind is disconnected from external objects, and there arises the understanding of the perceiver itself. So meditation is the attempt to come to the point of actual self-realization, at least the realization of my spiritual identity, my essence as spiritual. The very well-known phrase, aham brahmasmi. This is the pursuit of the yogi, to discover their true spiritual identity. And so meditation means that one will attempt to become absorbed in that which is transcendental, absorbed in transcendence. The system that was followed by many yogis was a focus upon the Atma, or the actual spiritual self. The Atma, or the spiritual self, is transcendental. It is a transcendental object, and therefore becoming absorbed in the Atma is meditation, and it will bring one to the experience of my true spiritual identity, at least my essence. So in the Bhagavad Gita, this is also pointed out in the 6th chapter, the 19th verse. It states, "As a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady in his meditation upon the transcendent self." In that same chapter, in the next verses, Lord Krishna states, "In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material activities by the practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and enjoy in the self." So meditation upon the self, or the Atma, is encouraged as a form of spiritual practice. The idea of meditating upon the world, anything connected to or related to the world, the energies that are manifest here, is not really the object of meditation. The object of meditation is to be immersed in that which is spiritual or transcendental, to be immersed in transcendence. It is this immersion that brings about great change and brings about true enlightenment. So one may ask the question, well, apart from the Atma or the self, are there any other transcendental objects that one could focus upon or meditate upon or become absorbed in? And of course the answer to that is yes. And there are 3 other principal spiritual or transcendental objects that were the focus of meditation for different categories of yogis. The first spiritual object or transcendental goal is called Brahman. Brahman is that which is true, which is real, it is spiritual, it is eternal. The nature of the material world is that it is temporary, it is passing. The spiritual dimension is that which is fully eternal and transcendental, filled with cognizance, and by nature characterized by great happiness or blissfulness, ananda. The second transcendental object of meditation is called Paramaatma. Just like we have already mentioned this word Atma, Atma literally means the self. Paramaatma means the supreme self. And we will speak a little bit about what that means shortly. The third, maybe I will explain a little now. Paramatma is a manifestation of the absolute truth, the supreme, that resides within the heart of every single living being. When the living beings manifest within the material creation, they are accompanied by this feature of the absolute truth known as Paramatma. Paramatma is an expansion of one of the three Vishnu forms, known as Kshirodakshayi Vishnu. Kshirodakshayi Vishnu, or Lord Paramatma, resides within the heart of each living being and is capable of directing and enlightening. The third transcendental object of meditation is Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the personal aspect or feature of the highest or absolute truth or God. So one may ask, well, how do you know that this is true? You know, we've entered a very unusual period in time where everybody seems to think that their personal opinion is often of very great importance. And while I do not want in any way to denigrate the wonderful spiritual nature of the Atma, each individual living being, this tendency towards not wanting to approach spiritual authority and to think that simply by my own mind and my own will I will be able to uncover that which is transcendental and that which is true is a false assumption. Since time immemorial, the foundational authority on spiritual matters is called Shastra. Shastra refers to the Vedas and any spiritual literature that supports the that which is taught or revealed within the Vedas. The compiler of the Vedas, his name was Srila Vyasadeva. Srila Vyasadeva foresaw that during this period of time in which we currently live, which began about 5,000 years ago, that man was going to be, he would have great difficulty with life, with his mind, and with his memory. And so in previous eras, these teachings of the Vedas were handed down from spiritual master to disciple in an unbroken succession. There was a very wonderful system by which the disciples memorized all of these teachings and were able to relay or recount or repeat them. Srila Vyasadeva saw that this period in time was coming to an end, and in order to make it easier for us, the people that will take birth and live during this period called Kali Yuga, he compiled the Vedic literature. And he stated that the final work that he compiled, which was called the Bhāgavata Purāṇa, that it was a natural commentary on the Brahma Sutra or Vedanta Sutra. And so within this Bhāgavata Purāṇa, in the very first of the 12 cantos or sections, major sections, the entire work is made up of 18,000 verses. There is one very beautiful and quite amazing verse, and it states that learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth can call that non-dual substance, or call rather this non-dual substance, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So for people that are not very familiar with yoga philosophy, this may not be very startling, but for those who are more exposed to Vedic teaching, and particularly for those whose main focus has been on the commentary and supporting works of Adi Shankar or Shankaracharya, this is quite an extraordinary statement. It states that the highest truth, or God, the absolute truth, however you want to phrase or describe this transcendental reality, is manifest in three features, or is available, can be known, experienced, realized in these three features. And these three features, while they may appear to us to be distinctive and different, are in reality all one in spiritual essence. So about 1200 years ago, Shankaracharya, he developed a theory of absolute monism. This is known as Advaitavad. And he taught that there was only one ultimate reality, and that ultimate reality is Brahman. He denied the Vedic teaching that Paramatma and Bhagavan were also features of that ultimate reality. Adi Shankar only embraced Brahman as the ultimate reality. Most modern-day yoga teachers in the world today, not of course wanting to generalize, but it is a fact, if we look at the prominent yoga teachers over the last, when I say modern, I'm talking about the last 150 years, they learned or embraced the position of Shankaracharya without appreciating these three features of the absolute truth which were taught by the Vedas. And the fact that, as is stated in that shloka which I mentioned, that the nature of these three features is that they are non-dual. Tattvam jad jnanam advayam. This is a subject that becomes a little difficult for the material mind to grasp. We have this tendency to often consider things in a somewhat limited manner. It is possible to understand how these three features all constitute the absolute truth, and how they are in reality non-dual, as stated in this verse, if we consider it within the framework of the teaching that was propounded by the great Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he developed in a wonderful aphorism which accurately depicts, it provides an accurate prism through which one can examine spiritual truth. In Sanskrit, this is called achintya bhedaved tattva. Translated, it literally means that the absolute truth is inconceivably and simultaneously one and yet different. This principle, this teaching that is propounded by the Vedas, is contrary to the proposition of Adi Shankara, Shankaracharya. So this, as I stated, is not a new idea, it is not a new concept. It is found throughout the Vedas and has been spoken of and learned since time immemorial. There are some very wonderful verses in the Katha Upanishad and the Svetasvatara Upanishad. And these two verses, they begin with the same two lines, which explain the nature of things. Nityo nityanam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidhati kaman. This line, nityo nityanam, it means amongst all the eternals, there is one who is significant or different. Amongst all the conscious beings, Chetananam, there is one who is different than the rest. For those who may have some foundation in Sanskrit, they will see that in this verse, the nitya in its unaltered term due to sandhi is nityaha, which is a singular noun. And nityanam means plural, vast ocean of eternal beings. Amongst this vast ocean of sentient and eternal beings, there is one who is different than the others. Amongst many living beings, he is the chief, and is stated in the second line here, he fulfills their desires. So in the Svetasvatara Upanishad, in the 6th chapter, 13th shloka, it states that he is the eternal amongst the eternals, the conscious amongst the conscious, and though non-dual, fulfills the desires of many. He who has known him, that is the luminous Lord, the great cause, to be realized by knowledge or sankhya, and by yoga is freed from all fetters. So for many people, I have seen, unfortunately, so many commentaries where there is an attempt to draw a singular identity with Atma and with Paramatma. That some people are saying Atma is the living being when he is overwhelmed by the material energy, by Maya, and in the liberated state he is Paramatma. This idea or notion is absolutely not supported by the Vedas. It is supported by some of the commentary on Vedas that was produced specifically by Shankaracharya. But in the original Vedic text, this is not supported. So these terms, Atma, and there is a Paramatma. There is Brahman, which is the broader understanding of spiritual existence, but there is also Para-Brahman, or the Supreme Brahman. Similarly, there is Purusha. Purusha refers to the Atma, the living being, the person or the enjoyer. There is also a Param Purusha. So these terms are frequently used within the Vedas. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 13th chapter, 23rd verse, we see a very wonderful verse. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the Supreme Soul, or Paramatma. As I pointed out earlier, that while the Atma and Paramatma reside simultaneously within the body, the Atma is you, the living being, and this Paramatma is the overseer, the Lord within my own heart, who accompanies me on my sojourn through the material world, providing me with inspiration and spiritual enlightenment should I seek it. In yet another verse in the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, the 61st verse, shloka, it states that the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated on a machine made of the material energy. So here, this Paramatma is referred to with the word Ishvara. Ishvara literally is the supreme controller, and it refers to this feature known as either Paramatma or Bhagavan, this feature of the Absolute Truth, the personality of Godhead. So this same Paramatma has been identified by Patanjali using the same terminology, this Ishvara. He refers to this Ishvara in the first pada, and he states that Ishvara is a special Purusha, unlike other Purushas. He is untouched by afflictions, by material activity, karma, and the fruit of actions, and also by latent impressions or material desires. So we have here a couple of things I would just like to bring your attention to. One is it describes the different afflictions that fall upon the jiva, the atma. the living beings within the material world. And he is stating that this Ishvara is not subject to these same afflictions. It is not that one time a person can be recognized as a jiva, as an atma, and become subject to these things, and then upon full realization that they become Ishvara. No, Ishvara never has the capacity to be covered by these afflictions. So he is described here by Patanjali as the Purusha Vishesha. This term, Purusha Vishesha, does not just mean different. It indicates a specialness. And this specialness of this particular Purusha or Ishvara is that he does not suffer ever from the same afflictions as the ordinary living beings. In the next verse, Patanjali states, "In him, the seed of omniscience is unsurpassed." It is infinite. Again, a characteristic that is not a characteristic of the jiva, of the atma, the living being. And then the next verse, "He is also the teacher of all ancient teachers or sages, being not limited by time." The transcendental sound representing him is Om, this pranava. That sound, Om, should be recited repeatedly and meditated upon, contemplating its meaning. So one of the things with the Yoga Sutra, this term sutra, it literally means something akin to a thread. And so what it's referring to are like small snippets of ideas. This Yoga Sutra, in reality, is not a detailed manual for spiritual cultivation or development. One must learn the process of spiritual realization, of liberation, under the guidance of an actual authentic and empowered guru or teacher. Such a teacher will explain and show, with support from Shastra or scriptures, what is the process, what is the path to be followed, what are all the things to be learned, what are all the things to be undertaken. Learning by heart and reciting this sutra, the Yoga Sutra, is a means by which a teacher or a student is reminded of what they have already learned from their guru and what they have been practicing, so that the teachings are passed on intact and complete. So the verse preceding these verses in relation to Ishvara is quite extraordinary. Patanjali has just spoken of the attainment of Samadhi, Sampragnata Samadhi. And he speaks of a higher position. The problem with this Sampragnata Samadhi, it is attained by more or less mechanical and philosophical processes. There is a condition called asampragnata samadhi, where a person can come to a completely transcendental platform from which they will never fall. A great yogi who has attained Samadhi, this position of Sampragnata Samadhi, can still fall from that position. And there are accounts within the Vedas of great spiritual personalities who fell from their position. Even if it was temporarily, they fell nonetheless. This position of asampragnata is different in that the very seed of desire, material desire, becomes utterly destroyed. This is a very stable, transcendental platform. And after describing it and the difficulty of it coming to that platform, Patanjali just throws out this wonderful gem. He says that this condition of Sampragnata Samadhi can also be attained by Ishvara Pranidhana. This literally means by complete supplication and surrender to Ishvara, by gaining his favor, that is the Lord within our own heart. One can be awarded this spiritual realization. This brings us then to this point of contemplating and considering that Ishvara, or Paramatma, who resides within my own heart, is actually my best friend. He is my eternal soulmate. He is the person that I seek, in whom I should seek love, in whom I should take shelter. This is also confirmed in the Mundaka Upanishad, the Svetasvatara Upanishad, and also in the Rik Samhita. There are these wonderful verses, and it describes that the living being, the Atma, and the Paramatma exist like two birds within the same tree. They exist within the same body. And it describes the nature of this relationship. Two companion birds sit together in the shelter of the same pipala tree. One of them is relishing the taste of the tree's berries, while the other refrains from eating and instead watches his friend. Although the two birds are in the same tree, the enjoying bird is full of anxiety and moroseness. But if somehow he turns to his friend, the Lord, and knows his glories, at once he is freed from all anxiety. So these are wonderful descriptions that many people are simply unfamiliar or unaware of, pointing to this amazing spiritual path and practice of Paramatma meditation. I mentioned earlier that of the many well-known yogis in modern times in the last 150 years, that most of them, almost all, have been primarily, they had adopted the teaching of Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya denies the eternal existence of Paramatma and says that the Atma can become Paramatma. This is completely unsupported in the Vedas. Amongst all of the great teachers of yoga in the last century or more, One outstanding exception to the statement I had made about being followers of Shankaracharya was Krishnamacharya, Tirumalai Krishnamacharya, often referred to as the father of modern yoga and widely regarded as one of the most influential yoga teachers of the 20th century. He is in fact credited with the revival of the Hatha Yoga system. So people are often or maybe unaware that he comes from a very ancient lineage or spiritual tradition called the Sri or the Ramanuja Sampradaya, which is very deeply rooted in ancient Vedic traditions and teachings. In speaking with his son and with a couple of his disciples, they all made mention to me that his Krishnamacharya's early exposure to Westerners, people that had no training in the Guru Sisha tradition, Guru and disciple, people that were unfamiliar with this tradition, were often, these Westerners were very assertive and challenging, and they were perceived by the Indian to be somewhat arrogant. And the result of that perception was that there was this understanding that the innermost teachings of the yoga system could not be shown or revealed to these people because they could not fully understand or appreciate and embrace it. And so there was the tendency then to not speak about these inner spiritual truths, and people that were considered less qualified, the Westerners, were treated to or taught the rudiments, the basics of the Ashtanga Yoga system without any deeper or more esoteric teaching. So towards the end of his life, Krishnamacharya wrote a poem. It's a very wonderful poem. It is called the Yoga Anjali Shram. It is this wonderful and sweet offering of yoga, in which Krishnamacharya reveals the inner perceptions and the private yoga practices of the yogis connected with these ancient traditions. The poem very much centers upon Paramatma Meditation. The poem was written in Krishnamacharya's native Tamil, and it was translated into English by his son, Desikachara. So I was going to share with you some of these verses of this rather long poem in the hopes that people might begin to question the importance and value of Paramatma meditation. The very first verse he begins, "O sleepy mind, praise Gopala, Lord Krishna, and Lord Hayagriva, the God of knowledge. Pray to the venerable teacher, for when the body becomes weak and depleted, today's education will not save you." Second verse, reflect constantly on the message of Yoga Anjali Shram. Dwell on the eternal while doing your asana, regulating your breath through pranayama, and meditate on the ever compassionate, dwelling within the heart. Then jumping to the 8th verse, seeing the beauty of the Lord in his heart, whose consort is Goddess Lakshmi, the Lord who supports this universe. The yogi dancing with joy is lost in this vision. So this speaks about the great ecstatic experience that the yogi has when, as a result of his meditation, this Lord Paramatma finally reveals himself. And being lost in this vision, it describes the yogi dances for joy. Jumping to the 20th verse, to meditate on the Lord of Gokula, Lord Krishna. Begin from his feet, then move up towards the trunk and the heart. Now meditate on his beautiful arms, then stay with the beauty of his form. Daily practice leads to stable mind. Regular chanting improves memory. Meditation results in marvels, and through mantra japa comes self-realization. Then in the final verse he states, regulate the breath, be happy, and link the mind with the Lord in your heart. This is the message of Yogi Tirumala Krishna. So these are wonderful descriptions of the fruit of Paramatma realization, Paramatma meditation. This meditation was practiced and has been described in many Vedic scriptures. The Bhāgavata Purāṇa says, this Purusha, whom the individual soul must approach, is the eternal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as Brahman and Paramātmā. He is the Transcendental Chief Personality, and his activities are all spiritual. In the Svatasvatara Upanishad, it describes that one Supreme Lord lives hidden inside all created things. He pervades all matter and sits within the hearts of all living beings. As the indwelling Supreme Soul, or Paramatma, he supervises their material activities, and thus, while having no material qualities himself, he is the unique witness and giver of consciousness. Another explanation in the Bhāgavata Purāṇa describes how the yogi meditates upon this Lord within his heart by manipulating a fire-generating stick. Great saints and sages can bring forth the fire lying dormant within the wood. In the same way, O Lord, those expert in understanding the absolute truth try to see you in everything, even in their own bodies. Yet you remain concealed. You are not to be understood by indirect processes involving mental and physical activities. Because you are self-manifested, only when you see that a person is wholeheartedly engaged in searching for you do you reveal yourself. Therefore I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. There is actually so much to share, and I know the time is rather short, and a lot of people will have difficulty even been able to allocate the time to listen, to attentively consider and contemplate upon these brilliant and extraordinary spiritual teachings that are representative of the greatest of all Vedic knowledge. When it comes to performing this form of spiritual meditation, this Paramatma meditation, how one should practice it briefly is described. In the Bhagavad Gita, it states that one should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated and subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sexual activity, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. This keeping the eyes half closed is a very ancient and traditional way of practicing meditation, and the focus upon the end of the nose actually brought an intense experience of being present within this area of the forehead between the eyebrows. When the eyes were half shut and one was in a secluded place, then one would not fall into condition of sleepiness. One was able to stay alert in their meditation. This was further described, the vision of the transcendentalist, the yogi, who has come to the experience of actual Paramatma realization, that he will perceive, and it is not just a concept created in the mind, there is the perception of this transcendental personality. In concluding, I would like to invite you to chant with me the mantra that was most commonly used by the ancient yogis while aspiring for this realization. That mantra was Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is the most wonderful spiritual sound vibration that can and should be utilized by everyone to have this form of God and self-realization, this Paramatma meditation. So I would like to invite you to chant this mantra with me. We will begin by bringing focus to ourself, our mind, our body, through a breath meditation where you will breathe deeply in, and on the outward breath you will relax and you will chant the spiritual sound, Gauranga. We are chanting this, breaking it into 4 syllables, Gauranga. We will do this first for a few minutes in order to bring us to a place of peacefulness in preparation for chanting the Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya mantra.
As you gently breathe, listen as we chant the Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya mantra. I will read a beautiful description of the transcendental form of Lord Paramatma, which is recorded in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Vasudevaya should keep the eyes half closed and fixed on the tip of one's nose, being enlivened and alert. One should meditate on the lotus flower situated within the heart. This lotus has 8 petals and is situated on a lotus stalk. One should meditate on the sun, moon, and fire, placing them one after the other within the whirl of that lotus flower. Placing the Lord's transcendental form within the fire, one should meditate upon it as the auspicious goal of all meditation. That form is perfectly proportioned, gentle, and cheerful. It possesses 4 beautiful long arms, a charming, beautiful neck, a handsome forehead, a pure smile, and glowing, sharp-shaped earrings suspended from 2 identical ears. That spiritual form is the color of a dark rain cloud and is garbed in golden yellowish silk. The chest of that form is the abode of Srivatsa and the goddess of fortune, and that form is also decorated with a conch shell, chakra, club, lotus flower, and garland of forest flowers. The 2 brilliant lotus feet are decorated with ankle bells and bracelets, and that form exhibits the Kaustubha gem along with an effulgent crown. The upper hips are beautified by a golden belt, and the arms are decorated with valuable bracelets. All the limbs of that beautiful form capture the heart, and the face is beautified by merciful glancing. Pulling back the senses from the sense objects, one should be grave and self-controlled, and should use the intelligence to strongly fix the mind upon all of the limbs of this transcendental body of the Lord. Thus, one should meditate upon that most delicate, transcendental form of the Lord's.
Bhāgavata
Bhagavate